I'm Andy Agafangelo, the founder of the Transparency Task Force. I set up the Transparency Task Force in 2015. It has since become a certified social enterprise, which means that we operate as a not-for-profit with a very strong sense of purpose. On Companies House, if you were to want to look, you will find that the Transparency Task Force Articles of Association states that we are all about our mission, and that our mission is to promote ongoing reform of the financial sector so that it serves society. Now, it's fair to say, folks, that when I started TTF back in 2015, I genuinely thought that the financial regulators were a big part of the solution. I thought the issue was about bad actors in the sector being naughty, and the regulators were doing all they could to stop that from happening. Boy, was I wrong. I now look back at my time through 2015, 2016, and 2017 with, frankly, a sense of naivety. I now see things very, very differently. And much of that thinking is based upon my understanding of and interaction with the UK's primary regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority. But through the many conversations I've had with people in the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, I recognise that the Central Bank of Ireland is equally problematic. I'm using very diplomatic language for the moment, is equally problematic. What's brought about tonight's event? I'll explain. You will all have seen the huge amount of publicity about the post office scandal in the UK. A scandal that had rocked the establishment. My goodness me, what a superb job ITV did in making Alan Bates versus the Post Office. It's remarkable, isn't it, folks? I'm sure we'd all agree that it's taken a damn good documentary, a damn good drama series to actually force the change that seems to be necessary. Now, because the Post Office scandal is so well known, we're going to spend very little time talking about the Post Office itself. In a moment, we're going to embark on a short exercise where I'm going to be inviting each of you to put into the chat words that you believe describe the UK's Post Office scandal. It could be a sentence or two, it could be a paragraph. It may just be one or two key words. In a moment, folks, please all participate and put into the chat the words that come to mind for you thinking about the UK's Post Office scandal. Then once we've got that bit out of the way, we'll then be able to kind of all be on the same page. In other words, we'll all be able to understand what we all about the UK's Post Office scandal. That will then set me free to talk about the event we had last week, on Tuesday last week, on, thank you, Joe, abuse of power. Absolutely superb, sir. Last week, at this very same time, we were running an event called What are the similarities between the Post Office and the Financial Conduct Authority, the UK's primary financial regulator? And boy, oh boy, was that a powerful event. And having run that pretty successfully, it was obvious to us that given our understanding of the similarities between the problems of the UK's FCA and the CBOI, the Central Bank of Ireland, why don't we run this event as well and just compare, contrast how things are different and similar between them? I must be one of the luckiest people around because I know so many people in the UK, in Ireland, in Canada, in Australia, in the United States, across Europe, in the Far East, all over the world. We've got Transparency Task Force members in 21 countries. I know so many people who know so much about the kind of catastrophic regulatory that leads to horrific outcomes for consumers. And I know there are many people with us tonight who understand what I mean when I talk about catastrophic regulatory failures leading to horrific outcomes for individuals. In March last year, I got on an airplane very early one morning to catch a flight to Scotland. I got off at Edinburgh, a short journey to a very beautiful rural part of Scotland called Kirkcaldy, Kirkcaldy, to attend the funeral of one of the Transparency Task Force volunteers, a gentleman by the name of Ian Davis. Ian was a lovely chap, a really lovely chap, and he had hanged himself. He hanged himself because he'd lost a lot of money, his entire life savings, just as he was approaching retirement. But we knew him well enough to know that Ian didn't take his own life because of that. We believe he took his own life because 3 years after losing his entire life savings, he tried desperately hard to get the regulators to talk to him and understand what he was going through, and to get them to look at the evidence he was gathering about the criminals behind the London Capital and Finance scam, the scam that took away his life savings and his entire financial security and well-being. And I've had conversations with some of you folk who are here tonight about people who've taken their own lives in the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. And that's why we owe it to ourselves, to each other, the people who've gone before us, the people who are going to become victims of financial crime and catastrophic regulatory failure in the future. That is why we owe it to ourselves and each other and them to do more with tonight's event than just run what will hopefully be a very interesting and illuminating session. So, just before we start populating the chat with thoughts about the UK's post office scandal, and just the UK's post office scandal, and come on to the FCA and then the Central Bank of Ireland afterwards, I'm going to share with you a very simple and straightforward idea that we are at the early stages of implementing. And frankly, we want your help to make this idea work well. And with your help, I'm really confident it will work. It will work supremely. So let me show you what I mean. I'm sharing with you right now. I hope you can see it. I'm sharing with you right now one of the many pages on the Transparency Task Force's website. As you can see, it's about our open letters. We've realized as a campaigning organization that there are 3 things that we need to have to make a difference. And those 3 things are interdependent. If we don't have one of them, it won't work, right? If we have all 3, we're in with a decent chance of it. So let me tell you what those 3 things are. We need, in no particular order, we need a really sound argument for change, a really sound, logical rationale behind why something needs to change. That has to be there. The second thing we need is support in Parliament, in the UK Parliament, and of course the same will apply in your governmental institutions. We absolutely need that. And the third thing we need, and this is absolutely key, we need support in the media. And in relation to that last point, support in the media, we've learned there are many ways to engage with documentary makers, with journalists, with investigative reporters, and so on. And one of those ways is through open letters. And open letters are simply when we send an important letter to somebody and we copy in our media contacts. We've got hundreds of media contacts in the UK, and we've got a dozen or so in the Republic of Ireland, but that number is growing all the time. So here's the plan, folks. With your permission and with your approval and with your support, as a consequence of today's event, in probably a week's time, Transparency Task Force is going to be sending an open letter to the leadership of the Central Bank of Ireland. And that open letter will basically reflect on the key findings as a consequence of today's session. It'll make direct reference to insights, ideas, and evidence that has been provided by our speakers. It will be evidence-based. We have to be evidence-based to be taken seriously. And the purpose of this open letter is simply to politely and constructively ask what the Central Bank of Ireland is doing in relation to certain issues such as vulture funds, issues such as foreclosure fraud, mortgage fraud, call it what you like, issues such as the Republic of Ireland's aspect of the Ulster Bank scandal, etc. And between us, we'll craft a really good letter, and we hope that it'll be picked up by journalists, both south of the border, north of the border, and maybe even in the UK, because we'll make connections to the narrative about the UK's conduct regulator also not doing a particularly good job. The letter will be polite and civilized and evidence-based, and it will be challenging. And one of the things this letter will do is say, we're watching. We're looking at what's happening. We're studying the evidence. We're getting forensic. We're piecing it all together. We're joining the dots. And we're going to do that relentlessly. Now, we either will be taken seriously or we won't. We'll have a strategy if we're not taken seriously, and we'll have a strategy if we are. And ultimately, the open letter should lead to dialogue. One of the principles, if you like, one of the guiding principles of the Transparency Task Force is a sentence that was first written in 1914, over 100 years ago, by an American judge, Justice Louis Brandeis. The sentence in a book about banking, as it happens, and banking misconduct, as it happens, the sentence is, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Now, I'm far more qualified to talk about the UK than I am about the Republic of Ireland. Hands up, guilty of that, right? But I absolutely know the UK needs a healthy dose of sunlight. And based upon what many of you have been telling me over the last 6 to 9 months, the evidence I heard in Dublin a few weeks ago, and also the evidence I heard in Dublin before Christmas when Edmund Honohan, the Master of the Court, spoke, and also evidence I saw and heard in New York. The evidence I've seen about what's going on in the Republic of Ireland makes me think that the Republic's in as desperate need for sunlight as us in the UK. Now, if you haven't realised, there is a very definite, highly intentional attempt for people in the UK and people in the Republic of Ireland to work together. And we think through that process, we're going to be able to make 1 and 1 add up to 3. We're going to be able to, as my close colleague Nigel Cairns mentioned a couple of weeks ago, we're going to make the whole more than the sum of the parts. So this conversation we're having, folks, is all about teamwork. It's about sharing. It's about understanding. It's about speaking it as it is. And it's about being brave enough to speak our minds. I hope that set the scene. What we're going to do now, folks, is that little exercise I referred to a moment ago, and I can see so many of you have already started with this. What we're going to do now is just use the chat to capture your thoughts about the UK's post office scandal. Now, it might be that you don't know anything at all about the UK's post office scandal, in which case, absolutely fine. You don't need to do this, all right? But it's an invitation for those of you that have learned a bit about the UK's post office scandal to put into the chat the words that you want to describe what you think the UK's post of this scandal is all about. And some of you have already been doing that. And it's so great that you've done that. I see from Byron, travesty of justice and betrayal, conflicts of interest from Mario, Nigel Keynes, an expectation that there will be no meaningful investigation or serious consequences for malpractice. Brian Riley, Brian goes on to Ireland. We'll come back to Ireland in a minute. Anna Kavanagh says gaslighting. Wow. Ian Duffield, a Brit, it was a travesty of justice and a betrayal of the contracted employees and also the public because of the casual use of public money to defend their abuse of power. There's some superb words in here. Brian Hall says unconscionable. Mario again says cover up. Liam, quite cryptic, but I get you, Liam. Liam says unsurprising, exclamation mark. Miriam says symptomatic of systemic malpractice. Well said, Miriam. And Joe kicked it off with abuse of power. Joe's one of our speakers later, folks. So allow me to invite you all just to spend a minute or so, if you haven't yet had a chance to put your thoughts into the chat about the UK's post of the scandal, to do so. Steve Middleton says, a large theft that no one is investigating. Remarkable. Remarkable. Nigel Keynes, again, ultimately government is culpable. Joe, who we know very well, shockingly realistic of today's appalling standards in corporate and government organisations, exclamation mark, says Joe. And Mr. Andy Candy, another Brit who we know very, very well indeed. The same establishment and regulatory cover-up of corporate crimes against the against the most hard-working people, as we have all seen and experienced across all banking scandals. Well, okay. All right, folks, because of what you've kindly done in populating the chat with your thoughts about the UK's post office scandal, we're all on the same page. Unless you've had your head in the sand for a few months, you all kind of know what the UK's post office scandal is all about. Please continue to feel free to populate the chat with your thoughts about the post office scandal. I mentioned earlier that I'm really lucky because I know so many people know so much. And one of those folks is Cormac Butler. I was saying to my colleague Alexander just before we started, Alexander's our head of events. If you don't know Alexander yet, you will in due course. Cormac reminds me of one of our UK colleagues, Mark Bishop. Very knowledgeable, very insightful. I found Cormac to be a bit of a kind of go-to person for somebody to give a evidence-based and balanced account of reality without pulling any punches. Cormac kind of says it as it is. And what I've invited Cormac to do is to get the kind of technical aspect of our conversation today off to a start by walking us through a set of slides that will be his analysis of what are the similarities between the UK's Post Office and the Central Bank of Ireland. Cormac knows this topic very well. If you know Cormac, you'll know that as a matter of fact. For those of you that may be new to Cormac, please take my word for it. He's a guy well worth listening to, and I respect his opinion, and I'm hoping that by the end of this session, you will as well. Cormac, can I please invite you to take this off mute? Share your slides when you're ready, and can the rest of us please show our appreciation to Cormac for preparing and delivering this session. Thank you very much indeed, Cormac. Great job as always. I'm sure we're about to see. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Andy, for inviting me once again to the Transparency Task Force. What I'm going to briefly talk about is the Central Bank of Ireland and contributory negligence, and look at the similarities between the Central Bank of Ireland, rather the banking system in Ireland, and the post office situation in the UK. And I'll try to make the talk as practical as possible, because I realise that some of you want this practical information. You may be facing court appearances, you may be facing possession orders. So some of this information will hopefully be of practical use to you. First of all, the similarities between the Central Bank of Ireland and the post office system, or post offices in the UK. In the UK, the post office relied on information technology from Fujitsu, and they relied on the data, even though they knew that data was questionable or even false. They nevertheless proceeded with court actions against some post office members. And these post office postmasters and postmistresses really were in a vulnerable situation because they didn't have the resources to take on the post office. And as you've probably discovered with banking in Ireland, you can tell an awful lot of lies and get away with it if you have influence over the banking system, or indeed if you're earning a lot of money in the banking system. So in Ireland, we have a similar situation as the UK Post Office in that the banks here rely on information produced by the auditors, and both the banks and the auditors know that it's false. The practical implications of this is that the post office in the UK actually broke the law. In Ireland, the people are breaking the law as well. Probably the most important and relevant piece of legislation for you is the European Communities Licensing and Supervision of Credit Institutions Regulation 1992. This is an EU law to ensure that banks operate safely and have enough capital to survive unexpected losses. Now, if you are in breach of this law, there is case law in Ireland, KBC Bank versus BCM Hanby Wallace. It's a Supreme Court case, and basically it states that if the banks are in breach of this law, they are potentially guilty of contributory negligence, and that means that they cannot sue you for their own contributory negligence. So the rules are broadly designed to ensure that the banks never lend more than they can afford to recover. If they do, then the banks may have engaged in contributory negligence, and this particular piece of case law says that it's the bank that is engaged in contributory negligence. So really what's happening in Ireland is the banks are breaking the law, they're breaking company law, they're making huge losses, and they are attempting to impose those losses on borrowers. No one borrows money from the bank with the intention of going bankrupt. And back in 2005, or at least from 2005 to 2010, the banks knew that a crisis was on the horizon. They had warnings as far back as 2001, and they knew that they were all breaking the law in the sense that they were hiding huge losses, and they knew it couldn't continue, and they knew that the property market was on target for a huge crash. They should have altered their lending policies at that particular point, not necessarily stop lending, but put in safeguards in place to ensure that the temporary reduction in property prices would not affect customers who borrowed money. They didn't do that. They simply encouraged people to borrow as much as possible. They focused on short-term artificial profits, and this encouraged them to break the European Communities and Supervision of Credit Institutions regulation. So if you're in a court and a possession order and the judge says, well, Promotoria are now the owners of this particular asset, and there's nothing you can do about it because they're relying on the banker's book of evidence, you can go to them and say, well, the banker's book of evidence is not reliable because the banks themselves were in breach of the European Communities and Supervision of Credit Institutions Regulations 1992. And if they were in breach, there is contributory negligence. Therefore, we need to see the original bank in the dock to explain how they lent money and their policies of lending money, and what their accounting policies were. Did they recognize losses on the day that the loans were advanced? And if they didn't, then they are in breach of accounting policies. Now, we have evidence from the National Asset Management Agency in Ireland, which suggests that banks overvalued their loans by 50%. In practical terms, that means that, let's take 52%. If you borrowed 100,000 from the bank, you could legitimately argue that the banks themselves are responsible for 52% of those losses because NAMA value those loans, and that you are responsible for 48% of the remaining debt outstanding. The judge has to take that into consideration, and he may form the view that the evidence put forward by Promotoria is unreliable because Promotoria or Everyday or whoever is involved was not around in 2002 to 2008 when the banks advanced these loans. Therefore, we want the original bank in the dock. Now, the Promotoria and Everyday are not going to agree to that. And in some cases, we have come across evidence that they'll walk away from the case rather than do that. They certainly don't want to set a precedent. And it'll become very clear why they don't want to set a precedent. This is evidence given to the central bank, who acted as regulators. It's a letter dated the 23rd of August 2001. The regulators in Switzerland, the Basel regulators, emphasized that if banks introduce an accounting standard called IAS 39, which you can see mentioned there in the letter, then it involves delaying the recognition of losses, may cause a delay in loss recognition. And as a result, they cannot supervise, central banks cannot supervise if that occurs. So they gave a warning back in 2001. And here we are in 2023, 22 years later, they are using those flawed accounting rules. So they got their warning back in 2001, yet in 2023, they are still using those flawed accounting rules. If that's not an example of contributory negligence, then nothing is, because it's very clear evidence that the central bank, at least the higher up people in the central bank, and certainly the ECB, would have been aware that this disaster was going to come down the line. The next slide is very important because they allege deliberate concealment, and this is very important for the statute of limitations. A bank can't go and say to you, well, even if we did break the law, we did so back in 2001, and the statute of limitations is 6 years, so you're wasting your time if you pursue this line. When you have two lines against that, first of all, you're still breaking the law, and secondly, what the policy they used in 2001 was to write an accounting standard which complied with the law, but then to issue guidance where they told the big four accountancy firms, ignore the accounting standards and follow these guidance. Now that is contrary to the law. Strictly speaking, the big four should follow the law, but what the accounting staff said is, rather the people who designed the accounting standards said more or less was, we'll write accounting standards that comply with the law, but we'll encourage you to ignore it, and then we will lobby to have the law changed to suit our circumstances. Remember, the motivation against on flawed accounting is to increase bonuses. Bankers in the past could only get bonuses if they made genuine profits. Now they can hide losses, create artificial profits, and then calculate bonuses on that basis. So this particular letter reveals, first of all, that the central banks were warned that there was going to be an accounting problem which would lead to a banking crisis. And secondly, there was deliberate concealment. So these are two very important points that should be raised in your cases, because we have evidence that all the major banks in Ireland were practicing this flawed accounting. This guy, Patrick Honohan, I believe is a brother of Ed Honohan. He was in charge of the central bank after the crash emerged. He was a professor, and they obviously wanted to bring somebody who was credible to run the central bank in the hope that it would restore confidence in Ireland. And to his credit, Patrick Honohan exposed these particular losses. So he said that the accounting rules were deeply flawed and needed to change. Unfortunately, he's no longer head of the central bank, and the central bank, even today, encourage banks to hide losses. Now, why is this of practical importance to you? If you go to court and you're trying to avoid a possession order, the court may say to you, well, Promotoria own the assets, or Everyday own the assets. They are the registered owners, so therefore there's nothing you can do about it, and this is a simple rubber stamping exercise. You can argue that It's not a simple rubber stamping exercise, because if it was, the actual transfer clause is unfair and therefore illegal. So if I say to a bank in 2005, I'm quite happy for my loan to be transferred to a vulture fund and no questions asked, then a judge would say, well, that means you're sacrificing any rights you have to contributory negligence, to a contributory negligence claim, and that would be an unfair term. So if you're a consumer, you can use that as a defense. If you are considered to be a professional buy-to-let landlord, you can use the claim that that particular clause is a clog and redemption, in which case you're denied access to your collateral. That makes the clause invalid. So these are points you should raise if you turn up in court, namely that the banks are in breach of the supervisory regulations and they're trying to hide their contributory negligence by selling the loans to Promontory and Everyday, and arguing that Promontory and Everyday are not responsible for this contributory negligence, and they are the registered owners, so there's nothing you can do about it. Certainly in lay litigant cases, judges often say to lay litigants, there's no point in taking on this case. It's a rubber stamping exercise. They are the registered owners. There is evidence that you missed payments. Therefore, there's a default, and therefore I'm going to hand over this possession order. So you have a strong defense by using the European supervisory regulations and explaining to the judge that there is quite a lot of evidence that the central bank knew of this in 2001. And at the bank inquiry in 2015, virtually all the banks admitted that they were exploiting these flawed accounting rules, knowing the danger that would erupt. Now, this is an interesting letter from the Central Bank of Ireland. That's the original letter, but I have the wording here. In 2010, when Anglo-Irish Bank exploded, the central bank issued this particular paragraph. As with other regulators worldwide, the central bank used the audited financial statements as a primary tool in its supervision of regulated firms. As a result, it is a concern to the central bank that, similar to the experience of other jurisdictions, Irish firms, particularly Irish credit institutions, were receiving clean audit reports in the years leading up to the banking crisis. Even though these institutions were running significant funding mismatches, were not perfecting their security when providing loans, had significant weaknesses in their corporate governance, and were, importantly, under-providing for impairment. So basically, the central bank said we were not aware this was going on in 2010, yet they were aware in 2001. So the top people in the Central Bank of Ireland would have been aware of what was going on, but the supervisors below them were not aware. They relied on the accounting rules. The accounting rules apparently allowed banks to hide losses. So therefore, you cannot comply with the European supervisory regulations if you are hiding losses. So this is very concrete evidence that banks are responsible for their own contributory negligence. They cannot hide losses and claim to be in compliance with the European supervisory regulations. Now, you may argue, well, that's all fine, but I have my particular bank would not admit that they've broken the law. In 2018, we got an article into the Financial Times about the Irish banking inquiry. The Irish banking inquiry took place in 2015, and it wasn't newsworthy because the bank said, okay, we've hidden losses, we don't deny that, but we were forced to do so. We had no choice. We were actually forced to hide losses. There was nothing we could do about it. So imagine turning up in court as a lay person and saying, I deliberately committed a fraud, but I was forced to do so. I deliberately misled people. I knew they were going to get into difficulty. I knew the shareholders were going to lose money. I knew the banks were lending money and that they were going to default before their money was actually lent, but there was nothing I could do about it because the accounting standards require me not to reveal those losses. So that's a very, very thin defense. You certainly wouldn't get away with it as an individual, but if you're in charge of PwC, or an auditor, a senior auditor with PwC, apparently you will be able to get away with it. So the 2015 Oireachtas banking inquiry is very important because it contains tons of evidence from all the banks that they were concealing losses. And the extracts from this should be used in your court cases because you can say there was contributory negligence by the bank, and the best approach to resolve this is to identify the contributory negligence and then decide what the bank is allowed to demand. From that, you will be able to prove that many of the demand letters issued by banks were incorrect and unreliable. Now, company law is a very important area. I'm not going to explain the ins and outs of company law, but I'll just talk about a few important areas in company law. Under company law, the originating bank can only enforce the recoverable value of the loan, not the amount lent. So if the judge is convinced that you've received 200,000, and he's also convinced by NAMA, National Asset Management Agency, that the value of the loans were dropped by 52% because the banks lent where they shouldn't have lent, then you could argue that the recoverable amount of the loan is 100,000, not 200,000. Or to put it more clearly and in legal terms, you can say to the judge that the National Asset Management Agency's valuation of the loans is 20 times more reliable than what the banks are spewing out themselves in their annual report. Now, if they're not able to recover the full amount, they cannot charge a cost of funds rate because a cost of funds rate is where the banks say, whatever we borrow, we'll pass that cost on to you. But if the banks are breaking company law and borrowing illegally, then they cannot benefit from their crimes by passing that rate on to you. So that will affect the interest rate charged. And given that the principal is too high to begin with, you could argue that your interest rates should fall by at least 50%. So the interest charge over the years should fall by at least 50%. There's a logic to the argument. A lot of people will say this is really over exaggerated, or that egging the pudding, or whatever they say. But we have to follow the legal logic to it. If the banks have overlent, they can only recover the recoverable value of the loan, and they can only charge interest on the recoverable value, not the full value. The third point is securitization. A lot of work has gone into securitization. I think the most recent presentation was by Tom Darcy, who claimed that there were problems with securitization and the way that they were registered with the Land Registry. I'm going to try and simplify this complex area to a very practical level. If the bank that you're dealing with, that's the originating bank, has failed to comply with company law because it hid losses, then the legal interest in the securitization automatically transfers over to the investor. Now, what they've been doing in Ireland is they've been securitizing loans and saying that the legal interest stays with the originating bank and the beneficial interest transfers over to the investor. But if there's evidence that the banks have not complied with company law, then they are not in a position to be credit services because they cannot pay any creditors if they're not complying with company law, and therefore they lose the legal interest in their loans, and that transfers to the investor. It follows that the bank cannot turn up in court and say, we're the legal owners and we want to sue you for the loan. And neither can they sell the loan onto the vulture funds, because that would be a double sale. They've already lost the legal interest, and now they're attempting to transfer the legal interest they've lost over to the vulture fund. Unfair terms legislation is always something you should bring up to the court, because the courts have a duty to mention this themselves, but they don't. They have it's an own motion duty, where if they see an unfair term, they have to look at it, and if it is deemed to be unfair, then it's unenforceable. And most variable interest rate clauses are discretionary in nature. They allow the banks to push up interest rates as much as they like, and for that reason alone, they are unfair terms. So that you have 4 lines of defence. I don't want to give you too many, because I'd rather you concentrate on 2 or 3 and argue them effectively rather than throw the kitchen sink at the judge. But in essence, the recoverable value is an awful lot less than the loan advanced. Secondly, the interest charged, the interest clause may be unenforceable. And thirdly, there is a securitization issue. And fourthly, there may be an unfair term. An unfair term, for instance, would be where you say to the bank in 2005, I'm happy for this to be transferred to a vulture fund. Because once it's transferred to a vulture fund, the vulture fund relies on the conclusivity of the register to say you can't really defend this. You just have to go ahead and give us your collateral. Quite a lot has been said about the Master of the High Court, who gave a speech a few weeks ago. Andy mentioned it. He was in New York. Broadly speaking, there are problems with the way that banks are registering the legal interest in their loans. There is the perception that once a loan is registered with a vulture fund, that there's not an awful lot you can do about it. Whereas in reality, you still have a contract with the originating bank. So my only point is to use what the Master has said by stating that the originating bank should be in the dock and not the vulture fund attempting to validate the loan. One other point that has been raised is that sometimes judges are frustrated is probably too strong a term, but if the case is not pleaded correctly, you could end up losing it. And that's stating the obvious, but I think you should read the case Pepper versus Jenkins, because I get the impression that the judge wished that if the constitutional argument about possession was raised, he might have had a different issue, or rather he might have had a different decision. So he says that the entitlement of the transferor to the beneficial interest in a security who retains the legal title to seek an order of possession might meet the constitutional threshold, but the present application does not raise that issue. So I think what the judge is hinting here is that just because the bank has the legal title, it doesn't necessarily follow that it can institute legal proceedings to recover the loan. That's not a weakness in the case. The Pepper versus Jenkins case was argued well, but I get the impression that some of the more honest judges would wish that some other arguments were pleaded in the case. It's not in this particular case, but in the cases in general. We raised the issue on the central bank's conduct, which is really what this speech is all about, with the Financial Times did an article on it, and we keep referring to that article when the central bank appeared before the Oireachtas Finance Committee. And the central bank keep on saying, well, first of all, they said that we can't comment on speculative articles. And John McGuinness, whom I think most of you know, said, well, this isn't a speculative article, it was a well-researched article. And it criticizes the central bank. Basically, it says that the central bank is lending money to insolvent institutions which they're not allowed to do. And the central bank has said to John McGuinness, yeah, okay, we'll look at this and come back to you. They've said that about 3 or 4 times, so they certainly don't like this article coming up. This is from the central bank. It just goes to show you that there are similarities between the central bank and the post office system in the UK. In the post office saga in the UK, the post office people said, well, whatever Fujitsu tells us is 100% reliable, and we use the Fujitsu evidence to make criminals out of you. And it's also happening here in Ireland. John Hurley, who was the former central bank governor, said that there's no evidence that banks became insolvent because PricewaterhouseCoopers examined the books, and he was referring to Anglo-Irish Bank here, which was deeply, deeply, deeply insolvent. Okay, one final area is that I'd like you to focus on Section 15, subsection 2 of the Civil Law and Criminal Law Miscellaneous Provisions Act 2020. Banks rely on this. They say we can take evidence from Ulster Bank or Bank of Ireland or AIB and allow the vulture funds to use that evidence against you. You can argue, the first thing you should do is when they put you on notice that they're relying on this, is to say that you have evidence yourself that this information cannot be relied on and that you'll argue the point in court. That allows you to open the door on the accounting fraud, the failure to comply with the supervisory regulations, contributory negligence, and the flawed interest rates. So I hope that gives you enough ammunition to take an action against the courts. You will need to simplify the argument for the courts. If it's too complicated, it won't register with them. But in simple terms, there was contributory negligence on the date that the loan was drawn down, and the vulture funds are relying on the conclusivity of the register to avoid having to open that can of worms. So you should simply argue that the original bank should be put on the dock to examine these terms. Okay, that's all I have to say. Thank you very much. And thank you, Andy.
Cormac, you're thanking us. Clearly, folks, it's us that ought to be thanking you. Before we go anywhere else, ladies and gentlemen, can I please invite you to join me in thanking Cormac, because that was a remarkably rich session with lots and lots of extremely valuable content. I really do hope that there are people here tonight who are coming away from this session with already really useful ideas that they can go and implement in relation to their own cases. There's nothing more satisfying than helping somebody keep their home. You know, this is the greatest thing we could possibly do. This really is. We're going to go to Hester, then any other quick comments and questions, and then we're going to go to Mr. Joe Lyon, who also is really, really pleased to be here. Hester, if you don't mind, just for context, let everybody know a little bit about you, just so they know your perspective, Hester. Hester will be speaking later, but Hester, if you can briefly introduce yourself and then share your thoughts for Cormac. Thank you.
Yes, good evening. It's 8 o'clock here now from the Netherlands. I'm an attorney in the Netherlands. I was used to work in the wholesale environment, but as of 2012, I am involved in the litigation of interest rate swaps and the collateral related to the interest rate swaps, so the so-called margin accounts. And as of 2014, I'm a whistleblower with the Dutch Financial Supervisory Authority and the Dutch Central Bank in respect of collateral fraud. In 2018, I discovered that it's 200 billion collateral fraud in the Netherlands, and that it's in European, it differs per country, but for example, Germany is 400 billion and so on. And I wrote a book, or I published it. I wrote it together with an author, a writer, and it's called Worst Bank Scenario. And I raise my hands because I'm very glad and excited to meet Mr. Butler, because I have watched his videos already, and I think that if we speak to each other and we will share our information, I think we will have the story complete. I discovered amendments in the bank accounts, in the annual accounts of the Dutch Central Bank as of 2018 until 2022. And between 2009 and 2018, the deficit, the collateral deficit of 200 billion euro has been how do you say that in English? It has been moved secretly, hidden under the Dutch pension funds ABP and pension funds Zorg en Welzijn. So it's a very complicated story, but and I will tell later a little bit more. But for now, I wanted to say that I'm very pleased to meet Mr. Butler and hear his story, because I think that this is really a big European scandal, and it's part of the new so-called transmission protection instrument of the European Central Bank, which has been launched in 2022 and will now part of the new monetary system, which is rolled out by investment banks.
Hester, thank you very much indeed. It's great connecting with people like Hester and Cormac and others. It really is, because as we said earlier, we have an opportunity to make one and one add up to three. The way I see it, folks, is it's almost like we're trying to we're trying to complete a great big jigsaw puzzle, this great big puzzle. And none of us have got all the pieces, but we all have some of them. Every single one of us has some of the pieces. And hopefully through conversations like this, we can assemble that landscape picture that the jigsaw puzzle is all about. We can come away enlightened. And as a consequence of that enlightenment, we can take action. And as I've already said, tonight's session is about galvanizing support for the idea that we're going to start a narrative between us collectively and the Central Bank of Ireland, initiated by our open letter. We'll have a strategy if they don't take us seriously, and we'll have a strategy if they do. But once we start this tenacious attempt to get justice, there's no reason to stop. We're going to go to Nigel Keynes very, very quickly, and then Ian Duffield very, very quickly, and then we're going to go to Mr. Joe Lynham. Nigel, as quickly and succinctly as you can. Thank you.
Okay, Andy. Yeah, well, firstly, I just want to say such a huge thank you to Cormac. The information that he's providing is absolutely invaluable to so many people. It's just, the whole thing is extraordinary. In fact, I'm wondering if we should take out life insurance on him to make sure that the flow continues. Just one quick question then. You made reference to the originating bank transferring to the Vulture Bank. But in my case, the originating bank transferred to itself, to a different part of the bank. And they did this at an arbitrary time. It wasn't completely arbitrary because they did it a week after they'd received a solicitor's letter saying that we were going to contest repossession proceedings. And they immediately made the changes at the land registry, the UK land registry. And it just seemed that this was mighty fishy to me. And the more I hear, the more I think that there's some substance to what you're saying today as to why they might have done this. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Nigel. Do you want to come back on that, Cormac, very briefly?
Yeah, this has happened quite a lot. In Ireland, we have something called the AIB comma, which suggests that banks or rather banks within groups are jumping their loans to different legal entities. It's a problem for the bank if they do that, because you can still call the originating bank, i.e. the bank that entered into the contract with you, to the doc and say that they've done something wrong at origination, and we want you to verify that the amount that you lent at origination was the recoverable value of the loan. And it would also be interesting if the bank confirmed whether it complied with the International Financial Reporting Standards. Now, you can see that from the annual report, if they did or not. What they have been doing, at least from what I can see, they've been taking the loans out of insolvent banks and putting them, insolvent legal entities, and putting them into more solvent legal entities to avoid the risk that they would have lost a legal interest in the loans. So the actual jumping of the loan from one legal entity to another does give you an opportunity to defend, a strong opportunity to defend your case. In particular, you should ask the judge to call in the originating bank, because they are the people that entered into the loan contract with you, and they are the people responsible for the contributory negligence.
I'm pretty sure that was a remarkably useful exchange of thoughts. Thank you so much, Cormac.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Cheers, Nigel. We're going to skip Ian and Trevor. We're going to come back to you guys later, if that's okay. We're going to hear from Mr. Joe Lynham next, please. I just need to kind of be quite agile with the running order and where we are in the programme. Mr. Joe Lynham next. Joe, please take a moment to introduce yourself, tell people a bit about your background, and perhaps most importantly, tell people why this topic is of interest to you as a media professional. Thank you very much, Joe. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. And just to correct what you said at the very start, it was my uncle Des Lynham who did all the sport.
Yes.
I only did a business and economics. He was from the breakaway, good-looking wing of the family. I didn't get that particular wing of the family. But in my time with the BBC, 17 years, I did a lot of stuff on the banks, and some of my proudest moments was exposing the outrageous behavior of RBS, now known as NatWest, and how they destroyed many small and medium-sized enterprises by revaluing unilaterally the value of outstanding debts and then pushing them into GRG, and GRG then basically forced them to sell assets at cut price levels to a different wing of the bank. Andy, you know all about it, so I don't need to bore you with it, but I was very pleased to be able to expose some of that outrageous behavior, and the regulator, the FCA, now the guy who now runs the Bank of England, even threatened me with criminal prosecution for revealing the promontory, not promontoria, but the promontory report, which they refused to release, even though it was incredibly damning of RBS. And I was slightly gutted to see Mr. Bailey get not only not fired, but promoted to the boss of the Bank of England. But anyway, that's another discussion. I have moved back to Ireland in the past 2 years. I've only been 2 years with News Talk, and there's a certain amount of reacquainting myself with the Irish banking system and some of the behavior that went on in my absence. And Cormac gave some very interesting analysis, and really valuable and detailed analysis. One thing is for sure, every financial crisis is different, and bubbles form in different countries, and the solutions are different. Ironically, the UK's solution was to create 2 new institutions, the Prudential Regulation Authority, the FCA, and keep the Bank of England. Ireland had the inverse. They had a separate financial regulator, but he was completely and utterly like an ashtray on a motorbike and did not do his job at all. And so everything's been folded back into the Central Bank of Ireland now, who is the one and only financial regulator that is in town. Now, I know a lot of the stuff that Cormac refers to repossessing, trying to gain control of assets again. Ireland has, and Cormac knows this, one of the strictest and most difficult routes to repossession for a bank. And this is for historical reasons and political reasons. Without going into Anglo-Irish history, property ownership and being allowed to own property is something that's very emotional and emotive in Ireland. And politicians have basically set the rules, or leaned on the central bank to a certain extent to lean on the banks to make it really, really difficult to remove someone from the family home. So the repossession rates, and I don't know if Hester is still listening, but I lived in the Netherlands for a year, and if someone is delinquent for, I think it's 3 months, the banks can start a process to remove someone from a house. Whereas in Ireland, they need to not have paid a single penny for years before there is any chance, before the banks can repossess. And there are more than 100,000 people in the Republic of Ireland who have not made a mortgage repayment in 10 years and are still in that home. So that's a different side of the discussion. There are people who the banks go for and who they shouldn't go for. And then there are those individuals who decide, knowing the law, that they will not make a payment towards their mortgage, knowing how legally impossible it is to remove someone from their family home. As for the Central Bank of Ireland, they have loosened the rules in the past year for allowing, basically they have made it easier to borrow money. Some people would think that's a bit mad, because there is something of a property bubble developing, not as gigantic as it was in 2007, 2008, but first-time buyers can now get 4 times their income, and the minimum deposit, which stood at 20% up to a year and a bit ago, now is down to 10% for second-time buyers or movers. So the central bank have loosened the rules in Ireland, and some might say, is that wise? But because it may push up prices even further because it allows people to get further loans. Be that as it may, there is still an investigation going on into the behavior of the banks from 2009 and 2010. In fact, today I got a message that the next stage into the tracker mortgage scandal, which was huge here in Ireland, is going to step up a pace. And before this month is out, a guy who was very senior in permanent TSB is going to appear before a panel. It is not it is a panel. I'm not sure it has judicial backing, though. Maybe someone else can support, can contribute for that. I'm not sure whether it has judicial backing, but it is a public forum. I was told not to refer to it as an investigation, but to refer to it as an inquiry. And that guy in Guinan will appear before this panel before the end of the month, and I'll be watching that very carefully. I suppose the overall question is, as a journalist and as someone who presents a show, which is a very business-focused program, are Irish banks still, you know, I don't know what the right word is there still a problem with Irish banks?
Are Irish banks still dodgy? Is the phrase that
Yeah,
comes to my mind, Joe.
Look, suffice it to say, there are only two pillar banks, 2.5, let's say, if you count permanent TSB, or they've now rebranded as PTSB. There's only two banks left. Now, anyone who's studying economics will know that if there are supernormal profits in any sector, new entrants will enter the market. And the quite opposite has happened in Ireland. Two banks have quit the market. Ulster Bank, belonging to NatWest, have quit the market in the last year, and so have KBC. Are they Belgian or are they Dutch? Hester, I think they're Belgian, aren't they? Koninklijke Belgische or Banking Corporation. Anyway, I think they're Belgian. They've quit the market, and so there is fewer. There are fewer banks in the market at the moment, and that is not good for Irish consumers. In a rising interest rate environment, it is even worse because the other non-bank players go to the money markets and have to pay more money to get money to lend to consumers. Whereas the pillar banks, Bank of Ireland, AIB and PTSB, they have savings and they have deposits and they make a lot of money on that. And Bank of Ireland made a nice cool €1 billion profit in 6 months alone last year. I will be interviewing the chief executive of Bank of Ireland. I think it's the week after next when they put out their full year numbers for 2023. I think we can safely say that they will be very, very healthy. And that's what happens when you don't have competition. When you don't have competition, the consumer loses out. So I cannot begin to lace the drinks of Cormac Butler when it comes to his knowledge of this sector. And I really appreciate him sharing that with us. And I might separately try to reach out to Cormac and sit down and tap into that big brain of his, because I am open to looking seriously at whether there is wrongdoing and whether it is being minimized or whether it's been swept under the carpet. But I don't want to do so until I have more information, and that is where I'm going to leave it. Andy.
Thank you very much indeed. We'll be proud to connect you with Cormac, as we will also connect Cormac to Hester. Without a doubt, there's real value in these forums in terms of bringing people together. I really see that being the case. Joe, I am off the scale pleased that you are here tonight and that you're chipping into the conversation. This is clearly a topic that's of interest to you today, and the banking shenanigans have been of interest to you in the past as well. And I really did not realise the point that you made earlier about you being, let's use the word, challenged as a consequence of your digging around in this space. We obviously respect that of you as a professional investigative reporter, and we are chuffed that you're here tonight. Can we please show our appreciation to Joe, folks? I know that you need to get cracking shortly. Joe, thank you very much. You'll always be most welcome in our community, Joe.
Thank you very much. And I will reach out separately and I am going to follow up.
Superb. That's absolutely superb. Thank you very much. And you might be able to give us some tips for the grammar on this open letter that we're going to send out, Joe. I know you're good at that sort of stuff. Thank you very much indeed. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. We're now going to go to Mr. Jerry Beads. Jerry, like so many of you, brings a ton of knowledge and insight. And everyone's got their own perspective. Everyone's got their own take. Sometimes you all agree on stuff. Sometimes you'll disagree about stuff. It really doesn't matter. This isn't about, as I know you know, this isn't about who is right. It's about what jigsaw puzzle pieces can you bring? And with that in mind, can we please make Jerry feel very welcome to this session? Jerry's known to many, many of you. I've heard so many great things about Jerry over the months I've got to know folks in Ireland. Jerry, you're very welcome. Please take the 5 or 10 minutes or so that you need as succinctly as you can, sir, because as is always the case, I've completely stuffed up on the timings, haven't I? So Jerry, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can, sir. Yes, we can.
Andy, as you know, when you came to Dublin, etc., we had a chat, and I set up an organisation called the Friends of Banking Ireland, the FBI for short, in 2006. After I personally was embroiled in a scandal with Rabobank / ACC Bank, who lost all the title deeds to my property portfolio. And unlike what we've now discovered, where the solicitor can send in a letter and transfer what Edmund Honahan has been talking about at the moment, in those days, a statement of title had to be produced, and it went on for 2 years, from 2004 to 2006. It eventually ended up in court, and I was awarded 4.6 million against ACC Rabobank. And on top of that, there was 1.2 million removed for overcharging on my loans. So as a result of the publicity that centered on that, an organization was formed. A load of people came together and we set up an organization called the Friends of Banking. And we started lobbying government. This was before 2008, before all the crisis had happened. And I spoke 3 occasions in front of the Parliamentary Committee, the Dáil Committee, that Edmund Honahan spoke before Christmas in front of, and we lobbied politicians and the committees on what was going wrong in banking before the crash. During the crash, the night of the bank guarantee, I was in the Parliament because Brian Lenihan was actually a friend of mine, and he was the man that set up NAMA later on as finance minister. I had many discussions with him. And NAMA was set up for a 20-year trip till the market restored. Unfortunately, in 2016, and this is what has resulted in a huge amount of loans being thrown to vultures, the government at the time in Fine Gael decided in 2015, an election come, and they wanted to be the good guys to shut down NAMA. And they basically sold off vast amounts of land for housing that's now resulting in the housing crisis, all attributed to the state literally had enough land for the next 50 years in its stock. And if they hadn't done such crazy things, we wouldn't be where we are. But anyway, we lobbied for all of those sort of issues. Moving on to 2016, John McGuinness became chair of the Banking and Regulation Committee. And we had meetings with John, and who was his assistant, Pierce Doherty from Sinn Féin. And we brought this issue of the overcharging of all of the banks to their notice. And the new committee decided that they were going to target this issue as an issue. And we pointed out that a lot of the stuff that we were seeing, all the overcharging, was on commercial loans, but that it had to be as bad on the residential mortgage market. They brought in the summer of 2015, when nobody was watching, summer 2016, the governor of the central bank, asked them questions about overcharging, and he said they were investigating about 700 cases. That was in June. They brought him back in September. He was investigating 1,500. They brought him back 6 months later. He was at 3,000. And as we know, that finished up at 50,000 people overcharged, and something like 2,500 people lost their homes, put out of their homes because of the overcharging. Again, feeding the information into the parliamentary committees has been crucial to those sort of, and that's what we specialise in, gathering the information. So that's mainly what the organisation that I've been putting together, as well as being involved in All Stops, had a big auction. They used to sell property. A group was stopped it in the Shelbourne Hotel and brought the whole property market to a standstill, and raised all the issues. But it just keeps moving on, and the government they've then got around to selling all the stuff, all the mortgages, and you know, they sell the legal interest, they sell the economic interest, the beneficial interest. It's effectively, you know, if you had a car, they sell the left-hand wheel to somebody, the right-hand wheel to somebody else, they sell the engine to somebody else, but they still call it a car. It's still a mortgage. It's absolute nonsense. And, you know, politicians are starting to wake up. Our courts are starting to ask questions. And there's a bit of a sea change in our courts, because we have a newer judiciary, newer generation, and they're asking questions now that hopefully we may get answers. But when you compare to the post office scandal in the UK, it's the exact same. Civil servants here who cannot be, their careers will never be stopped. The legal profession who, you know, doesn't see any wrong, they'll pursue people to the end of the earth, whether it's right or wrong. The central bank have been hauled in front of John McGuinness's committee, finance committee, on several occasions, and have had to make major apologies and whatever else. There doesn't seem to be anywhere else for the central bank to be queried other than in there. And at the moment, we've been sending in information to John McGuinness's committee on the central bank issue and what Edmund Honohan has raised when he was in there as well. And Edmund Honohan has referred to John Deeney's book, and I saw you flashing it up there tonight. And I have a copy of it here. And really what's lacking is very simple. The vulture funds on a one page. I recently discovered a property of mine that was sold by a vulture. But not only did they register the land that they sold, but they registered adjoining land that was never charged. I went to court on the 19th of December and got a court order. Luckily, I was able to do the court application myself, and I got an order ordering the Land Registry, Property Registration Authority, to provide the file, which we got last Monday week. And I have given it to Edmund Honohan, because most people, you're not entitled to see these files. Once it transfers out of your name, you're not entitled to see it, and unless you get a high court order. And the problem with that is, with most people, if you go to a lawyer, it'll cost you 10 grand to get a high court order to see the file, to see how it was taken from you. So in John Deeney's book, there's meant to be a statement of title, which gives the history of how it has ended up in the person who wants to transfer it. That's now abolished, apparently. And the solicitor actually sent in two maps on a one page, a 1 A4 form. And he sent in map 1 and map 2, two maps. And Land Registry wrote back to him and asked him which map did he want to register. And he wrote back and said, register map 2, which was the one that had my other land with it. And they just go ahead and register it. And that's it. Now I have to make a High Court application to try and reverse it. I got a letter today from them that they're very busy and they get round to looking at it shortly. You know, under the Constitution, we have property rights here, and it would appear that the Property Registration Authority has completely ignored. So we have massive problems here with administration, civil servants, and particularly the media, who, you know, one of the major newspapers, and I won't name the journalist, but a number of people have been communicating, he had no interest whatsoever until he discovered his own mortgage was sold. And now recently he started asking questions. And this is a regular, nobody wants to upset the apple cart. And so we are where we are.
Jerry, thank you very, very much indeed. I'm sure everybody's feeling what I'm feeling. We are really being treated to some incredible insights. Some of what you just said, Jerry, just is appalling, isn't it? It really, really is. Folks, in the interest of time, we're going to go straight from Jerry to Hester. Hester's going to share some insights about, well, not just the Central Bank of Ireland, but perhaps also the European Central Bank, and Hester is really well qualified to do that. Once we've kind of raced through all our speakers, we'll open up to general Q&A, and everybody that wants to say something or ask something is going to have a chance to do so, I'm sure. Thank you very much indeed, Jerry. Can we please thank Jerry and also at the same time kind of welcome Hester back to the forum, as it were. Thank you. Cheers, Jerry. Great stuff. Hester, back to you. Thank you.
Yes, I will share a link to my website of the book, because we have a video on that website. And this video has been translated recently into English. So it's a video for dummies.
Perfect.
Where do I have to start? I just hear the word life insurance, and I can tell you that I concluded a life insurance in 2014 when I discovered how big the scandal is. So, and I also think I heard the name of, I don't know how to pronounce it in English, but the promontory RBS report. And I know that this consultancy firm is also involved in the Dutch Central Bank as advisor, but they have also issued an investigation report in respect of Danske Bank. And I know, well, in my opinion, the whole anti-money laundering scandals are a cover-up for the bigger frauds in respect of the collateral. And it's very interesting because on the date that the Dutch ING Bank concluded an agreement, a settlement agreement with the Dutch state in respect of the 170 million euro penalty in relation of the anti-money laundering. On the same day, the Danske Bank published a message that they have discovered money laundering in the branch in Estonian branch. And the first amount that they published was 30 billion euro or 30 billion dollar. But if you look into the annual accounts of Danske Bank of 2014, this is exactly the amount of the net open position of the interest rate derivative swaps. And well, unfortunately, the managing director of this branch died. And it's not clear how he died, but in my view, these, all these kind of money laundering scandals are a cover-up of a much bigger scandal, and I describe that in my book. So my book contains the story that in my view, the credit crisis was not an accident, but it was deliberately, they knew and days, for example, Mr. Draghi and Mr. Wellink of the Dutch Central Bank, who went to the Bank for International Settlement in 2006. And they knew that there was a problem between the banks and the insurance companies and the pension funds because of the fact that there was a lack of collateral, a lack of liquidity, liquid collateral, which you have to, which you need to have if you conclude these kind of contracts. And the story in the Netherlands is that the whole credit crisis was a problem in the United States, and well, and most of the time we point at the United States or to the UK, but it's never happened in the Netherlands. But in my view, the credit crisis is a result of the interest rate management between of banks, of their own balance sheet, and the lack of liquidity. Well, in the Netherlands, they were required from a legal point of view to have this liquidity management, this collateral management as of 1995. But the Basel requirements, the international banking standards, did not prescribe liquidity rules until the credit crisis, only for capital standards. And what you see is that they changed their balance sheets in 2007, their balance sheet management, and they issued, they replaced their own mortgage loans by securitizations into securities. They asked for a listing on the exchange, so they were tradable, but they kept them all on their own balance sheets. So they are on the balance sheets and they are so-called encumbered. And then they use these encumbered securities on the repo market to receive cash or more liquid assets. And well, my book is about the whole new, in my view, the transmission mechanism that the ECB started in 2007 together with the investment banks like ING Bank, and how they secretly changed this mechanism. And apart from that, we also had the problem in the Netherlands that if you conclude contracts with your clients as a bank, you need to ask for collateral, for liquid collateral. But when they sold this kind of interest rate swaps to the clients before the credit crisis, of course, they didn't ask for collateral, liquid collateral, because otherwise no one would have chosen this contract. So they administered on a bank account secretly a margin amount as collateral, and that was related to their mortgage. And because of the fall in interest rates, clients were required to provide for additional mortgage security, but they didn't know how that was possible. So that's the client side of the story, and it's I won in 2015 with the higher court, and in 2019 with the Supreme Court. But these decisions are how do you say that? Denied, or they do not. The supervisors do not recognize it or consider it as a decision. It's even worse. The Dutch financial supervisor, the AFM, issued a report in 2015, a misleading report, in which they said that there was no liquidity risk in respect of the interest rate swaps. And in the meantime, they were hiding this liquidity risk, and the liquidity risk, well, now I know that it's 200 billion euro, but when I started this whole journey, I didn't know. So yeah, I think that in 2020 I started the book, and at that time I didn't know that there is already a new system in place. The good thing is that the English translation of the book is more up to date than the Dutch one. So I described also the new monetary system, but that's also very worrying, because in 2007 the central banks of Europe started to build a new collateral management system, And the Dutch Central Bank has the lead in this building this system, and it will be launched in November 2024. So that's soon, that is this year, and it will be part of a bigger monetary, what do they call it, multipolar system. And in this system has already been built by Goldman Sachs, ING, etc. And it's a blockchain system, and it's based on the collateral. And in the report of the European Commission of June 23, in respect of the collateral directive and the finality directive, the European Commission advised to have emission allowances and bank guarantees, etc., also as eligible collateral with central banks. So, which means that in the near future, carbon allowances, emission allowances can be considered as eligible collateral, and that will mean that they can be used as collateral, and they can make liquids. And I think that's really a big threat for our freedom, because then our debts and our funds will be related to carbon emissions. So that's the end of the story where we go to, and I think that we really have to, need to stop that system, or at least the freedom which will be which is in danger. My whole story, I'm very sad as a lawyer. I became an attorney. I was always a business lawyer, a company lawyer within ING, and also within the Dutch Securities Exchange and Derivatives Exchange. And I worked with LCH Clearnet always in the professional markets. And I became an attorney and admitted to the bar in 2007. So when I was a little bit older than normally. And it's a very big shock that I discovered as of 2012 that this is possible. And I always say my heart as attorney is broken, and I have no idea how I can stop it. That's why I wrote a book with all the risks, but we published it in 2022. So, and we haven't heard anything like litigation or something like that. But I wrote it for the children, because I think that it's a very, very big fraud and scandal. And I discovered secret decrees, Dutch decrees. I discovered in 2010 a decree that they said we will close the systems. If we are allowed to, the banks were allowed to close the systems, and because they had no data before 2007. So I have all the evidence that it's really a fraud, and it's deliberately, but it's denied. And of course they keep it small, and they try not to.
Hester, hearing you talk just reminds me of the importance of this notion of sunlight is the best disinfectant. I mean, there you are with all the evidence and all the proof, and you've written a book, and we just need to somehow amplify the evidence and your knowledge and insights, as we do with the other folks as well. Hester, thank you so much for sharing what you have tonight. I've already put a link to the book in the chat. Please don't hesitate to do the same, folks. Can we please thank Hester, and also invite Steve Middleton to share some thoughts on this very quickly. And you'll notice, Hester, Steve has made reference to the margin side of things in the chat as well. Hester, thank you very much indeed. And Steve, welcome to the stage, as it were. I know you can spend just a couple of minutes helping to elaborate for folks' interests what you put in the chat. Thanks, Steve. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. I'll be brief because I know we're running over time tonight. What strikes me, the questions we're asking are, what are the similarities between the UK's post office and the Central Bank of Ireland. And as I look at what happened, the thing that comes to my mind is that we have an intentional fraud. I don't think we just have a glitch on a computer system. I think there is an intentional fraud, yeah, that a lot of money goes missing. Profits are made by certain parties. Now, one of the big issues that Hester mentioned, something that we obviously have raised in Northern Ireland, is this issue of undisclosed credit lines on fixed rate loans, where the bank put in liabilities and debts against customers without their knowledge for profits the bank was making on the loans that they were selling. And so certain parties were making profits and big profits and commissions, and that's not disclosed. Then what happens afterwards is there's a cover-up. And the cover-up is done for one simple reason, that whoever's had that money wants to keep it. That's my view, yeah? And then what happens? Well, what happens after that? The government, the regulators and civil servants all join in and help with the cover-up. So why is that? Well, it's quite clear to me that we're all having the family silver stolen one way or another. If that horizon was a proper glitch, just a problem with the system, surely what we'd be hearing is that for every postmaster who lost £50,000 and couldn't shut the accounts down, somebody else gained £50,000. I don't recall seeing any of those victims sat there saying, oh, I was up every year. I could never work it out, but I was making 20 grand here and 50 grand there. Didn't happen. It was always money going missing. So interesting to see that Nick Reed, who now runs the post office, when he's asked about where the money's gone, said he still doesn't know where the money went, but it may have gone into the pay of post office bosses, is what he said. Yeah. So if you go back to something like the HBOS Reading scandal, that was based around a computer system that the bank bought in that had a glitch that didn't recognise increases in overdraft limits. So the bankers would get rid of directors from a company that had a £200,000 overdraft, and over the weekend it would go up to 20 million and send 20 million offshore. It was a huge money laundering operation that went on for years. There was £1 billion went missing. Only 10 million ever came back from Mills. Where did the money go? Yeah, this is just outright theft on a grand level. And the problem is, what should be happening here is that we should be following, to solve these problems, you should be following the money. If you see who ends up with the money, you'll work out backwards who created the problem. And you'll find there's some very senior figures here getting very, very wealthy. I suspect sat with large bank accounts in Caymans, Bahamas, you name it, that nobody knows about. That's why I see as a striking similarity. Now, the other thing that obviously I mentioned there, which is this undisclosed credit liabilities, what struck me again, I was going back through some of the issues on the post office and how it was exposed. It was argued down to the whistleblower they had, Richard Roll. And if you remember, the post office were saying all sorts of things about how nobody could get into the systems. Yeah. And so Panorama was actually doing the program, or setting up this program back in 2015, a Panorama on it. And they were being told categorically, no one can get in that system. They actually had the network manager, Angela Van Bodegaard, brought in the journalists on Panorama and insisted nobody could change the submasters' accounts, postmasters' accounts without their knowledge. She said any alterations would leave a footprint. Yeah, so it's not possible. Nobody can go in. It hasn't happened. Yeah, and yet that was just before 2015. In 2011, Ernst & Young had done a report warning that Fujitsu staff had unrestricted access to sub-postmasters' accounts. That may lead to the process of unauthorised or erroneous transactions. So the bottom line is, at the highest level in the post office, they knew for years that money was being stolen from sub-postmasters, and yet they kept letting these people go to prison. It's an absolute disgrace. You will only ever see a change when those people who will allow that to happen, and those people who allowed those criminal convictions to proceed, themselves face criminal charges and some time behind bars, is my view. Yeah. Now, the problem is this is systemic, and what you have in Ireland, you have, we exposed this fraud in Northern Ireland about fixed rate loans having credit lines, which they shouldn't have. So the bank were putting liabilities against customers without their knowledge. That led to those customers going under, breaching loan to values, becoming insolvent. And it wasn't allowed. It was a fraud. It's an outright accounting and regulatory fraud, and it's been admitted as such. Yeah. Well, what's happening in Ireland? Well, when that all came out, if you remember, I think it was, who was it? John McGuinness, I believe it was, who was raising these matters, wasn't it, in the Finance Committee, and Devil Rowland
Yes.
from the central bank actually said very categorically, this didn't happen in Ireland. She's lying. It did happen in Ireland. I've got evidence of people in Ireland with those fixed rate loans, with those credit lines. But where I know that she's lying, I'm happy to say this in the public domain. Let's see if she comes back and says anything to me. I also have the emails to Devil Rowland in 2015, providing evidence of credit lines on those fixed rate loans. So there you go. The Deputy Governor of the Bank of England had all of the evidence, had all of the information. And you know, when they were approached recently and asked why they'd never responded to the allegations made back then and what happened to all the evidence, do you know what? The evidence has all gone missing. So I'm sorry, when I look at this, to me, I see it very simply. What I see here is people are seeing ways to steal money and they're taking that opportunity, whether it's at senior level, director level, whether it's at junior level. That money is going somewhere and people are retaining those funds, and then there is a big cover up. And in simple terms, Andy, that's what I see as the big similarity here between what's happening in the post office, the bank survey, and now what's going on in Central Ireland.
Fantastic. You screw so much valuable insights there. And Steve, for those of you that don't know, Steve is something of a, for want of a better phrase, a bit of something of a general, if you like, within the TTF army that we are creating and building to try to get justice for everybody. And Steve's analysis is there, it is absolutely spot on. So it really is. Steve, thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed for being here tonight and for all the work that you're doing, exposing the Ulster Bank scandal and the other things that you're battling away on. You're a remarkably knowledgeable, tenacious and right-minded human being who ain't going to take no BS from no one. And when you know something's wrong, you'll stand your ground and you'll bloody well prove it. I really do respect the work you do, Steve. Thank you very much. We're going to go from Steve straight to Liam Deegan. Liam's a professional journalist, an investigative reporter. Many of you will know Liam already. It's so good that we've got folks like Liam here from the media. We've got people like Joe Lyman from the media as well. And that momentum is building. Liam, over to you, sir. Thank you very much indeed. And welcome to the mic. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Look, I'll be very brief, really, what I'm going to say. I had something bigger planned, but I think I'll just, we're obviously all running on a timescale here. I have to leave this meeting very shortly. I have to meet somebody actually who's in serious trouble with the banks, and they've recently got a possession order on their house. And the bank is moving very, very quickly to take that house. So I need to go and obviously see these people now. Now, look, myself and Tom Darcy, as most of you know, we had a press conference last week, and in it we basically said we had made criminal complaints to the Gardaí. Now we've had those complaints accepted. We have what they now call crime numbers rather than pulse numbers, and the word crime numbers kind of says something in its own right, because what we really have here is a crime, and it's a series of crimes that's affecting thousands upon thousands of people. But the reason myself and Tom put this whole criminal complaint together is because we weren't seeing anything big happening in the courts. We had the Jerry Burns case against Promontoria, which obviously the government changed the legislation really quickly to stop people, claiming here that the banks and the vulture funds the vulture funds were using hearsay evidence. So we've been thinking about this for a long time, and we said, well, we're going to try the criminal aspect and see what happens. It's actually taken quite a while to get here. A lot of the police didn't want to really take on the whole thing because, they kept telling us that it was, civil matter. We kept hearing that, and we're still hearing that actually from people who are now trying it. But, through the civil courts, there's no silver bullets. And in fact, it's probably proven to be a noose around people's necks. As the establishment then use the arguments or the solutions or the silver bullet against the litigants and their legal teams. But what we should really be doing here is a joint approach. In fact, myself and Tom and others now are going to stick with the the criminal aspect of it, but just something that Cormac actually raised a couple of times tonight. And, you know, Cormac is really setting out a path, I think, that we can maybe, you know, work together with him and others to, you know, establish the serious defenses. In other words, put them on paper, put them down. Let's talk about it, you know, because many people wouldn't be able to argue in front of a judge. We see people crumbling in front of a judge. I've seen it many, many times. And it's horrific to see. Very sad. But so maybe Cormac can write up, you know, a little booklet on how to make a good argument. And, you know, it really is for those who don't have the knowledge or ability to stand up in front of a court. They might get something good from this. They might have the good arguments that they can add to affidavits and whatever it might be, you know. So I think a dual approach is probably the way to go here. As they say, like, well, let me give you tomorrow, Waiting for the Sheriff, which is Tom Darcy's website, Tom Darcy's book, The Whole Shebang. Now, I'm working with Tom on this. We stand to make nothing out of this, nothing at all. No money. There's never a mention of money. There's never a mention of compensation. There's never a mention of anything, because we want to do what we want to do, because we're good people. We like to help. So tomorrow at noon, anybody who wants to log on to waitingforthesheriff.com, they can download the necessary documents that they can make the complaint to the Gardaí with. There will be a couple of documents in that. There'll be a document that will show people how to fill in the forms, how to do all of this. You know, we've made it as simple as possible as we can. We have, as they say, opened the door to something very serious in taking on the land registry, or Táilte Éireann, as they call it. And it's important that if you have an issue with the vulture funds, where your loan was being, where what do you call it, legal title is being given to the likes of Pepper, but we know that's bullshit at the end of the day, that these guys have that. And they're the very people who take it to court. They're not supposed to take it to court. This is fraud. This is, as Ed Honehan said, it's fraudulent misrepresentation. And this is what they're chasing. This is what we're chasing them on. But just to say, though, finally, that in the complaint to the Gardaí, we have about 9 separate laws that they broke. Very, very simple to get. Very simple to get. And particularly we found that the one with the land registry was quite interesting, because they've now taken it down from the website, which is section 3, power of attorney. And some people say, well, you know, the banks have power of attorney, or the vulture funds have power of attorney. Not when they're claiming, not when they're using fraud to open the door to claim that. We're making sure that's going to change now. But the land registry have taken on half their website because of what we've done. And, you know, we need people to kind of come together, join forces, and beat the vulture funds, and beat the you know, beat the banks. We just need to work together is really what I'm saying here. So anybody who thinks they have a criminal complaint, as I say, tomorrow, waitingforthesheriff.com, they can download everything for free, follow the instructions, send them in to the Gardaí, go to your local Garda station, whatever you need to do, and make your complaint, and then let it start from there. We need to kind of overwhelm the system, is what I'm trying to say, with legitimate complaints, because the templates that we're giving are, you can't change them. And if you do change them, you're possibly going to, you know, lose access to your police complaint if you're filling it full of bullshit, as they say. So, look, bottom line, we're all in this together. Some brilliant people on here. You know, we have to give Cormac Butler his dues on his own, because he's, you know, after bringing some brilliantly salient points up, but we need to be able to bring them together and give them to people and say, look, this is what you do, this is how you make a defense. So yeah, that's basically it.
I love that, Liam. The idea of giving people a toolkit that they can use to defend themselves. You know, it's almost like giving somebody a sword or a shield, isn't it? You know, you're going into the battle currently without any armor or any weapons. Let's see, I'm talking metaphorically speaking here, of course,
Of
folks.
course, yeah.
Let's see if we can do what Liam's just spoken about, which is to give people what they need. I think that's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Before you go, Liam, please, I ask you, put into the chat details about how people can access that session that you just referred to, because I'm sure there'll be loads of people here who want to know exactly that. Liam, thank you very much indeed. Seamus, I know you're nimble on your feet. Dive in for us and tell everybody what you want to say. Thank you, Seamus.
Hey, everyone hear me, yes?
Perfectly, sir. Perfect. Thank you.
No, I maybe appear nimble on my feet, but I've been hunting dogs out of my office all night. Opening and closing doors at their behest. Listen, that's been as usual, a brilliant night. The headline act was probably Cormac, absolutely fantastic. I've heard him, I don't know Cormac personally, but I've heard him many times, including in the Dáil, the Irish Parliament, etc. A lot of very interesting points made tonight. And I suppose I was surprised when I found out the extent of the UK Post Office scandal, and primarily because I spent 18 years as competition consultant with the British Aggregates Association. And I got to know the setup in the UK reasonably well and made presentations to the competition authorities over there, and very successful ones we did at the time. And I would have always thought that things in the UK were fantastic. Regulation and honesty and integrity was way, way ahead of what my experience in Ireland was. So what I hope now happens with the post office scandal, apart from all these people being properly compensated, is that all these heads that we know about go to prison, and go to prison for a considerable time. And, you know, that just reminds me of back in 2004, the head of the Irish Competition Authority, a very, very good man, Professor John, Professor John Fingleton. Now, John Fingleton told Parliament committee in 2004, bearing in mind now from the Competition Authority, it will not be until judges decide to convict people who are members of the same golf clubs of which they themselves are members that we will really see white-collar crime being tackled. And of course, that has never happened in Ireland. Nobody gets punished for white-collar crime. And at a recent Transparency International AGM, you know, I told the meeting that every sinew of Irish society was corrupted. And the excellent boss, John Devitt, sort of admonished me and said, no, it's not anything like that bad. But I think where we were at cross purposes was I was including what the term legal corruption is, as well as raw naked corruption. And like raw naked corruption is where I pay a politician in Ireland maybe 10 or 20 or 30,000, whatever, to get planning for 20 houses. We all know about that, and there's been a lot of that went on in Ireland in the past. But it's not just my view, but it's my experience that the legal corruption, the cronyism, the nepotism, the capture, that's far more caustic on society than that raw naked corruption. So the index, the Corruption Perception Index for the world, was just published, I think, in the last week. And Ireland comes out at 77 out of 100, which is very good. England, I think, is 71. But the reason these countries are so high is that the Corruption Perception Index doesn't include legal corruption. And like legal corruption is far more damaging to society, as I say. And legal corruption then leads on to things like, let's look at the regulators. We're talking about the Central Bank. We're talking about the British Financial Conduct Commission, isn't it? And like the Irish regulators, take the competition regulator, the corporate regulator, the Central Bank, the Gardaí, which is the police force. Well, I've dealt extensively with 3 out of 4, the Central Bank being the odd one out. And they are nothing but phony regulators. They are not there to catch the bad guys. They are actually there to protect the bad guys. And this is coming from a rotten culture within the political system, which is getting worse and worse and worse. And today we had, I think it was today, Billy Kelleher, he's a Fianna Fáil member of the European Parliament, calling out for competition in the banking market. I mean, this is just frightful lie. We have lobbied and worked, and we actually had a motion passed in the Dáil in 2016 to give the post offices a banking license. We wanted the credit unions to get a banking license, or we wanted to set up a community or / public bank. But the bottom line is the ECB is monopolizing the banking market across Europe, and they're making them cowboys and they're letting them do what they want and get away with what they want. Professor Richard Werner, which many of you know, he tells us that over 5,000 banks, not branches, banks, have disappeared from Europe since the ECB was set up in about 2000, I think. 5,000 banks. And somebody mentioned about Ulster Bank and KBC leaving the country. And yes, they left the country allegedly because of losses, but in reality, they left the country because of an ECB promoted consolidation program. So they've pulled out of Ireland. Don't you worry, their parent companies got a little bit of a cake in another country somewhere else. This is how they work. And we're now back to the 2.5 pillar banks, which are robbing us blind. So, you know, we talk about all these victims and people that are in court, people with possession orders and all the rest of it. The problem again is, and I have no problem saying this in public, there is supposed to be separation of powers between our judiciary and our legislature. And that's actually a core plank of our constitution. But there is no separation of powers. I can absolutely verify that because I'm 27 years alone in one case in court. It's not a banking case, it's a competition case. But I spent 15 years in court fighting all the other banks over minuscule amounts of money. But I was there, and they whatever the government want, the judiciary will deliver. And that's why we're in the mess that we're in. I can't really put it any stronger than that. And I just stuck one of my slides here now. There's something. Oh, yes. Yeah, this is an interesting one. I might have mentioned it at another meeting, but one of the people I respect highly is Chris Menton. He's an interviewer on that, and he interviewed Professor Steve Keen some years ago around the time of the crash. And Steve Keen said about banks, ultimately, the financial sector should be the servant of the rest of the economy, not the master. But at the moment, it's the master of not just the economy, but of the politicians as well. So to break this nexus, we need a complete political shift. So like, I'm never going to be as good as Cormac Butler and many of the other people on the micro issues that they're so brilliant on. But, you know, there are people within these various groups that want to change the culture, that want to change the political side of it. So there's a great team assembled, and hopefully it will grow and grow. And that's really all that I have to say, Andy, tonight.
Mr. Seamus, mate, I really always enjoyed listening to you speak. I really do. Thank you very much indeed. And we're going to go from Seamus to Miriam. And then, folks, I'm in one of those moods. I feel up for the conversation. So we'll keep things going for as long as others want to, up until maybe as late as 8:30 UK time. You know, we're grown up, so we can start a little bit late, can't we? Miriam, hopefully your mic issue is sorted now. Let's see. I don't think it is. I don't think it is. All right. Okay. Folks, at some stage over the next few months, we're going to have a whole proper chunky speaking slot with Miriam. I was absolutely blown away when she told me what she did to fight back against the banks and to stand her ground and to stand up for what was right, including immersing herself in education and knowledge and getting a degree and all sorts of things. She's a really, really impressive person. So impressed with you, Miriam. The only thing I'm not impressed with you about is your inability to get the microphone going. But keep going while we share some thoughts. Now, Mr. Trevor Meelan is one of the most tenacious, potent campaigners there is. Trevor does a lot of things I have huge respect for including literally helping people to stop having their homes repossessed. Absolutely bleeding amazing bloke. Trevor, you always tell it as it is. We're short of time, sir, so please be as succinct as you can, but go for it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andy. So first on the notice board, we've got on Thursday, West London, me and a mob of guys will be at a property and we'll be facing off Lloyds Bank and Walker Morris's bailiffs. And no doubt we'll have a face-off with the police. The last one of these that we done was around about September, October. We got to the property and somebody had put an angle grinder, not me, through the metal mesh. We managed to get in as the police were turning up. The security guards were at the front and we retook the property. One of us spoke to the police on the outside. We pointed out due process. We asked the police about their oath, which they didn't know. We asked if there were more senior coppers. We then had 20 coppers there. And it resulted that we quoted the law. We got an intelligent copper. He said, we're going to stand down. And I said, under your oath, you've got to uphold human rights. Can you ask the thugs out the front to go? So he did. And then the police went. So what we did, we totally switched it. They protected the owner. And because there was a court case coming up 3rd of January, we used liberty of the subject, due process. She'd not exhausted that. And so on. So hopefully we'll be doing the same again on this Thursday. We always hope that we're not going to get arrested, but I've got some good guys that I'll be joining. And this one is based on proprietary estoppel, which takes me back to my estate agency days where the lady made big contributions into 2 properties. They were due to be renovated. She'd have one of the properties. The other chap, the builder, would have the other. Lloyd's put him through hell and the chap died, mental breakdown, and so on. And they've put this family through hell. So we'll be going forward to support that. Interestingly, in the court, Lloyd's have used a Maitland Chambers barrister, which I don't mind saying on open air, take me to court. And the judge also was from Maitland Chambers. How cozy is that? So that's that one. That's happening Thursday. Hopefully I won't get arrested, but hey ho. The other thing, I've had into the Project Hague website today. I can't release sources or whatever, but it's a very interesting email. So it's come in and it's in reference to land registry. It's somebody that I know of. And it says there was an apology letter sent out from land registry about a database mistake made by an employee of land registry who'd been there for many decades in service. They took substantial amounts of cash, so obviously I need to get this verified in exchange for changing the land registry database. The land registry employee was found guilty and jailed for 4 years and fainted in the dock. That's a shame, isn't it? This leads to this person having a very, very big claim, and they've been fighting it quite a few years. So I'll find out more about that. But if we can actually get proof that someone's gone to jail who worked in land registry for fiddling the figures, that's not a bad thing. So hopefully I'll have more updates on that in the coming weeks. And that's me done, Andy.
Trevor, thank you very much indeed, and good luck on Thursday. Really, really good luck on Thursday. I think there's something quite saintly. I don't really know what the right word is for somebody who's helping somebody to stop their home from being repossessed by the people who literally turn up in your day. Well done, Trevor, for doing what you do. Well done, well done. Miriam, if at any point in time you think your mic's working, just start screaming and shouting at me. We'd love to hear from you, okay? But in the meantime, let's see if anybody else would like to share any thoughts. And I'm just about to put something in the chat, which is tomorrow. Tomorrow, my colleague Alexandra is going to be emailing all of you. And one of the points we're going to cover is, would you like to be part of the working party crafting the letter that we are going to be sending to the Central Bank of Ireland. And let me just talk a little bit more about that. Oh, that's a good idea, Marie. You're going on your phone, aren't you? I can just see you. Yeah, I think that'll work. Good idea. I'm just going to share my screen and show you all something. Whatever is it? Bear with. There we go, campaign. Right. Okay, so long story short, this is something we do from time to time to get to help us get taken seriously. So this particular thing I'm showing you is a letter we sent in March last year. We sent it to a lady called Harriet Baldwin. She's a member of Parliament in the UK. She is, as you can see, the chair of the Treasury Committee. And the letter basically says, Dear Harriet Baldwin, can you please open an inquiry into SME finance, and in particular, the issues of misconduct in the banks. I'm keeping it simple. Okay, you see the bit I've highlighted, and the letter explains why we're asking for this to happen, and it links to various things. And it was written mostly by one of my colleagues, Mark Bishop, who I mentioned earlier. Mark's really good at writing this sort of stuff, and it worked. As a consequence of this letter, we got the inquiry opened. It's actually still running. It's still running, and long story short, it gives us a chance to create a platform. Now, as you can see, what we did is we got various organisations to co-sign the letter. So it's done as Transparency Task Force, but we get others to kind of chip in with our help. So here's TTF, here's SME Alliance, which is a campaign group. Here's the Federation of Small Business, which is a great big organisation in the UK, representing the interests of small businesses, etc., etc. Here's Bank Confidential, which is a community interest company, a charity run by Steve Middleton and a colleague of Steve's, Mark Wright, and a couple of all-party parliamentary groups. This all-party parliamentary group is one that the TTF is a secretariat for. We had our AGM today, it went very well. But we also had a couple of people who were involved with something called the Business Banking Resolution Service. I won't explain the unnecessary detail. But look, we also got some MPs. So these are MPs, members of Parliament, who also co-signed our letter. Now, I imagine it's quite difficult to not take quite seriously a letter that's sensible, rational, polite, constructive, courteous, intelligent, if it's co-signed by a whole load of other people. So maybe we can get some of the TDs to co-sign our letter, our collective endeavour letter to the leaders of the Central Bank of Ireland. Oh, and look, we've got some people from the House of Lords to co-sign it as well. Oh, and look, we've got some people from overseas to co-sign it too. And here we got some individuals who've been, plain language, shafted by the banks. Excuse me, ladies, for my poor language. It could have been worse, believe me. And we organised them according to who the MP was. So, for example, Lisa King, who we know very, very well, such a lovely, lovely lady. Such a lovely, lovely lady. Lisa King, a victim of misconduct by Lloyds Banking Group. She, as you can see in the letter, is a constituent of Alex Burkhart, her MP. And we got some other folk as well. And some other folk as well. And some other folk as well. And you can get the gist, can't you? So not only, folks, are we talking about a really intelligently written letter. I can't do it, but we collectively can. It's all about teamwork, folks. We'll try to get as many people in the Irish Parliament co-signing it. Forgive me if I've used the wrong word. Parliament, it's not the right word. I can't pronounce Oireachtas. Help me, folks. But we'll also get some people co-signing it who are victims of banking misconduct. And we'll hopefully get some folks in the media to publicise the letter. We'll probably email them over the next couple of days and say to them, look, in about a week or so's time, maybe a couple of weeks, we're going to be sending this letter to the Chief Executive, Chairman of the, the chair, I should say, of the Central Bank of Ireland. And this is roughly what it's going to say. And we think we're going to get loads of people to co-sign it. and we'll put it through all the social networks and get as many people to co-sign it as possible. And maybe, just maybe, that's going to help that letter to be taken seriously, as it would appear this letter was taken seriously. So that's all part of the cunning plan, for want of a better phrase, that this session tonight is all about. That's what we're basically doing, and we want everybody to chip in on that. So the point I'm making basically is that we're going to ask people to volunteer to be part of the working party to write the letter. Okay, so all the speakers tonight, please help us write the letter. If anybody else wants to chip in and help us write the letter, please do, etc., etc. Thank you for that. We're going to go to Hester, and then we're going to go to anybody else that wants to share their thoughts. So Mr. Brian Riley, I call Mr. Brian Riley big man, big man Brian.
Can I interrupt?
Yes, you can. Hooray. Hold on, Miriam. Round of applause for Miriam for finding a way to get herself heard tonight. There we go. It's quite ironically wonderful that Miriam has got herself heard.
I've been ousted from, not ousted, but the security guards were locking up, so I had no choice but to leave.
Okay.
I'm currently en route, so I tell you what I'll do. I'll write something for you all and post it to you, Andy, rather than you have me running to catch the bus and trying to get out of doors with my path. I'd rather you not do that.
For sure, for sure.
And I might be a little more coherent with the writing than I would be with the actual speech and walking at the same time. So I do apologise for my audio issues. I don't know how it happened, but look, I will write away to you, and you can send it to all your members, and I'd be happy to speak the next time, hopefully with a better microphone.
Thank you very much indeed, Miriam.
Okay, and thank you for the information. Talk to you later. Okay,
you're most
bye-bye.
welcome. Don't get locked in. Get yourself home safely. Thank you, Miriam.
I will.
Next time,
Bye-bye.
next time,
Bye-bye.
we'll
Bye-bye.
set aside a good chunk of time. Thank
No
you.
problem. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Let's go to Hester, and then we'll go to anybody else that wants to chip into this, what I think has been a really wonderful conversation. Hester, back to you. Hester.
Yes, we gave the book as a present to all the 225 members of the parliament in March 2023.
Wow. Which parliament, Hester? Which parliament?
Dutch parliament. So it's the
Fantastic.
first chamber and the second chamber. So it's 225 member of parliament, and also to a big part of the governance itself, the ministers. They received a copy or the book as a present, and I have not received any response to it. So.
Wow. There we go. That kind of says it all, doesn't it, Hester? It really does say it all.
Because I'm also a friend, and also not formally the lawyer, but I support a whistleblower from the Dutch SNS bank. She started to whistleblow in 2012. And as people may know, the SNS bank was taken over by the Dutch government in case of an insolvency, or was a new law that they could be taken over by the Dutch state. And she was asked to go to the Dutch House of Whistleblowers in 2016. That was just new. It was just founded, the Dutch House of Whistleblowers. And she went to that house, and in 2017 they discovered someone from the secret services house. But in 2021 she received the declaration that she had notified in favor of the social relevance, or I don't know how you call it in English, but that her notification, her whistleblowing was true, and that she is a real whistleblower. And then the Dutch state nor the SNS bank did anything with that report. So as of today, she has no own house. She is. It's a really sad story. Her health is not very well. tragedy, and it's well, the House of Whistleblowers, it's very useless. So this is how it works in the Netherlands.
Understand, Esther, understand. It really does look as though, you know, they talk about best practice, sharing best practice. It really does seem as though worst practice is shared internationally. I started realizing that when we had, well, when I went to New York and we had some of the people speaking there about what's been going on in the US around foreclosure fraud. Thank you, Hester. Thank you very, very much indeed. We're going to go to Seamus, then to anybody else that wants to chip into the conversation. Seamus, back to you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Andy. No, there's just one thing I forgot to mention, and I think everybody will be struck by it. I was very struck by it. But when the corruption perception index was published globally in the last few days, the chairman of Transparency International, a chap called Francois Valerian, he had this to say: corruption will continue to thrive until justice systems can punish wrongdoing and keep governments in check. When justice is bought or politically interfered with, it is the people that suffer. Leaders should fully invest in and guarantee the independence of institutions that uphold the law and tackle corruption. It is time to end impunity for corruption. I think there lies a lot of all our problems.
Well, that's really, really powerful. Seamus, as you know, we are trying to engage with Transparency International, and it looks like the response we're getting from that organisation is very, very positive. Folks, sometimes people get Transparency International mixed up with Transparency Task Force for good reason, obviously the same word. Transparency International, if you don't know, is a really remarkable organisation. It's very, very international, and it's all about exposing corruption. So it's a big, big, proper organisation. We definitely aren't Transparency International. We're just a grain of sand on the beach compared to that organisation. I'll put a link to the main website in the chat, and if we can, we're going to get some proper engagement with the folks in Transparency International Ireland, and hopefully that will prove to be very, 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 very productive indeed. And in fact, I might ask them for some help in writing that letter. That could be an interesting idea, James, couldn't it? That could be a really interesting idea. Okay, I'm going to go to what we call gallery view, so I can sort of see everybody. Please wave a hand at me, or raise a hand digitally if you want to come in with anything. Don't worry if you're not a public speaker, if you've never done anything like this before. It's a very, very informal approach we take, so feel free, folks, to chip in with anything if you'd like to. Otherwise, I'll start bringing the session to a close. I'm just putting something in the chat. I think we might be good. I think I've worn you all out, haven't I? I think I have. Okay. Look, I really do hope that that you've had a worthwhile session, folks. I'm going to kind of bring it all together. We started off, of course, talking about everyone's perceptions of the post office scandal in the UK. You remember everybody had the chance to put words into the chat that I that referred to. Alan G, will come to you in a moment, sir. Everybody had a chance to put into the chat the words that they could relate to. I spoke about the event we had last week, which is about the similarities between the post office scandal and the FCA, that's the UK regulator. And the rest of the session, we've been hearing from, I think, a wonderful lineup of speakers who have been talking about the Central Bank of Ireland and related matters. I haven't kept count, but the word corruption and corrupt has been referenced many, 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 many times. And you all understand, I hope, that we are going to be using tonight's event as step one in a series of steps that's going to result in the open letter being sent out. We'll get as many people as possible to co-sign it, and hopefully it'll be taken seriously. If it is, great. If it's not, there's a plan B. There's a plan B. Mr. Alan G, please do take yourself off mute and share your thoughts, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. It was just a quick point. You mentioned Harriet Baldwin letter.
Yes.
I don't know if you saw the latest post about the Freedom of Information Act on X, Twitter as we call it,
Right.
which was the UK Asset Resolution, for anybody who doesn't know it, concerned the Northern Rock, Bradford and Bingley Mortgage Express transfer or sale to Computershare. They're not quite sure what they did. One says UKGI says it was a sale. UKFI says it was a transfer. Computershare say it was a transfer. So the actual letter was to Andrew Tirry, MP, the chairman of the Treasury Select Committee, which was UKAR has announced it has signed a contract with Computershare for the outsourcing of its mortgage servicing activities. This follows UKAR's earlier announcement on the 1st of February. The FOIA, which I received today, says UKAR didn't enter into any servicing contract. So it's quite they don't quite seem to understand what they're doing. So
Wow.
I'm just trying to find the FYA, but I couldn't work out how to get the hand up on there. So it's on there as Northern Peasant anyway. So you'll see it's the latest post. It's contradicts each other, so they haven't got a clue what they're doing. But like I say, I just want to mention quickly on that point, it was Harriet Baldwin who wrote to Andrew Tirry.
That's very, very interesting indeed. That's very, very interesting indeed, Alan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Folks, if you look for Northern Peasant on Twitter, you'll find a whole load of stuff that Alan does. Very, very well indeed. Alan, I'm just popping my email into the chat. Please email me about that. I'm really interested in what you just said. Thank you very, very much indeed. Hester, Seamus wants to know, is your book in English available in hardback?
No, unfortunately not. It's only available in ebook.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you for answering that, Hester.
So
Thank you
if
very
you
much.
know a publisher who wants to publish it in the UK with a hard copy, I love to publish it also in the UK.
Hester, I'm showing off now. Here's the TTF book we published about 2 years ago. Hardback, softback, and what's the other one? Ebook. Yeah, I'll send you a note about that. Why we must rebuild trustworthiness and confidence in financial services and how we can do it. We're very, very pleased with that. There was 50 of us from around the world wrote that book together, Hester. It's like a collection of essays. Thank you. I'll put a link to that in the chat. Does anybody else want to chip in? I think I've had too much coffee again today. I'm still wide awake. Does anybody else want to chip in with anything before we wrap up? In which case, I'm going to just share my screen once more and make reference to something I frequently make reference to. I'm hoping you can see this. Sure. In so many ways, in so many ways, what we're having to do, folks, is to courageously speak out, And when I think about courageously speaking out, I very often think about this quotation from Robert F. Kennedy. I've referred to it so many times, you've probably heard me say it before. For me, this quotation gives me courage when I'm thinking about shall I or shan't I say that? You know, sometimes you don't want to. I found it quite interesting when Nigel made a kind of off-the-cuff comment about, has Cormac got life assurance? And I know for a fact that Hester wasn't joking. I know for a fact she wasn't joking when she spoke about life assurance as well. And it's with that sentiment in mind, I'm drawing your attention to this wonderful quotation from the late 1960s. Every time we turn our heads the other way, when we see the law flouted, when we tolerate what we know to be wrong. Let me go over that again. When we tolerate what we know to be wrong. That's what most people do. Most people will tolerate what they know to be wrong. And as a human being, I'm trying to not be that person. I'm trying to not tolerate what I know to be wrong. And I think there are many people in this session tonight who are exactly the same. We're trying to not be the people who will tolerate what we know to be wrong. We're trying to be people who will stand up rather than stand by. So every time we turn our heads the other way, when we see the law flouted, when we tolerate what we know to be wrong, when we close our eyes and ears to the corrupt because we are too busy or too frightened, when we fail to speak up and speak out, we strike a blow against freedom and decency and justice. And ladies and gentlemen, that's been what tonight's session's all been about. Thank you all very much indeed for your time and your attendance and your participation. As always, it's a privilege for me to host these sessions. Thank you all very, very, very much indeed. Thank you. We'll get the recording out as soon as we can. Please share it far and wide on social media. Social media is bloody horrible, excuse my language. Social media is awful in so many ways, but the one thing it can do for little organisations like us with no resource at all is to help raise our activity and our awareness. Please share far and wide. Thank you all very much indeed, and thanks for such kind comments in the chat as well. Thank you very much indeed. Next time, see you then. Good night all, good night. And forgive me for stuffing up on the timing so much. I'm an hour over. I don't learn, do I? I don't learn. Good night all. Good night all. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good night all.